Hello, we are back today with Chapter 7 of our novel, I Survived the Joplin Tornado, 2011. Chapter 7. It was Wednesday, April 3rd, 1974, Dr. Gage began. My 11th birthday. I got a brand new bike, and after school, all I wanted to do was ride around town to show it off. Dr. Gage grew up in a small Alabama town called Jasper with his parents and two little sisters. Beautiful place, quiet and friendly, a little like Joplin. The day was hot and very humid, not unusual for Alabama in the springtime. There were thunderstorms forecast all around the South up into Ohio. That wasn't so unusual either. But there was nothing usual about these storms. They were supercells. While Dr. Gage was happily riding his bike along the peaceful streets of Jasper, storms were already unleashing tornadoes for hundreds of miles in every direction. Boom! A tornado touched down in Cleveland, Tennessee, destroying the entire downtown. Boom! Another took aim at Xenia, Ohio, wiping out a neighborhood of brick houses, destroying a high school and killing 32 people. Boom, boom, boom! Tornadoes struck in Kentucky, Indiana, and Georgia. At 5:15, the skies in Jasper grew suddenly dark and it began to pour. I figured it was just like a thunderstorm. I was more worried about my bike getting rusty than anything else. The town had no tornado siren, so Dr. Gage had no way of knowing that a massive, rain-wrapped tornado was heading right for him. I pulled to the side of the road to wait out the storm. I waited there under a tree thinking about the cake my mother was making for me. It started to hail, huge stones that pounded down. My ears started to pop like crazy. I didn't know there was a sign that a tornado was coming. I didn't know that was a sign that a tornado was coming. The air pressure is so low inside a tornado that the sudden change in pressure makes your ears pop, like when you're in an airplane. Dex had never heard that. And then there was a sound like nothing I'd ever heard before. Most people say that a tornado sounds like a speeding freight train, but every tornado sounds different. This one was roaring and hissing like some kind of snake. Stuff started flying through the air, leaves, branches, and roof shingles. That's when I realized what was happening. "What did you do?" Dex asked. There was a big ditch right out the side of the road. I dove in and wedged myself under the root of a huge tree, held on for dear life. I got pummeled pretty badly. A tractor came flying out of the sky and crashed down about 10 feet from me. The tree I had been standing under was ripped out of the ground. My arm got sliced by a hunk of steel pipe that hit me at 150 miles per hour. Dex shuddered. "But I was incredibly lucky," Dr. Gage said. "I made it, and so did my parents and my sisters. They rode out the storm in our basement. The house was pretty much destroyed, but we felt blessed. 23 people in our town were killed, including 2 of my friends." It turned out that the EF3 tornado that hit Jasper was part of what would become known as the super outbreak of 1974. Over 24 hours, 148 tornadoes touched down in 13 states. By the time the skies had cleared, more than 330 people were dead. You'd think that after that, I'd stay as far away from tornadoes as I could, but I decided to learn everything about them. I became obsessed. The more we know about tornadoes, the better we will be able to predict when and where they'll hit. You know, last month there was another super outbreak of tornadoes all across the South. That's where Jimmy and Sarah got caught. It was as bad as the one in 1974. We lost 321 people. So we haven't made much progress, Dex. We need a much better early warning system so that people aren't caught by surprise. Something in Dr. Gage's voice, a steely edge, reminded Dex of Jeremy, how he sounded when he talked about his missions. They were alike, Dex realized. Both were trying to make the world safer, but both were risking their lives. Both were hunting killers. Dex wanted to know more about what had happened to Dr. Gage that day. But just then, Dr. Gage pointed out the window at a whirl of thick gray clouds rushing in from the west. "There it is!" he exclaimed. It was their storm. The chase was on. Chapter 8, 5 p.m., Columbus, Kansas. They followed the storm east for about 3 miles, and then they pulled off the road. They got out and stood at the edge of a cornfield. The air was steamy and thick, and the wind was stronger. The corn plants rippled like waves on a stormy ocean. They stood for a few minutes, watching as the meadow-gray cloud grew thicker and darker. Before Dex's eyes, the cloud formed itself into a giant circle. The bottom was perfectly flat, and the top towered up into the sky, as though it would bump into the moon. Dex thought it looked like a UFO, but Dr. Gage had a more scientific name for it. "That is a perfect cumulonimbus cloud," he stared in awe. "Those are the clouds that make tornadoes." Dr. Gage walked to the back of the SUV and popped open the tailgate. "Let's get some sound pods into the sky," he said, grabbing the rifle. "Would you like to do the shooting?" Dex took the rifle, trying to act as if it was no big deal. But inside his brain, an excited little voice was screaming, "I get to shoot the pods! I get to shoot the pods!" Dr. Gage grabbed 4 of the silver balls. He took a quick look at the weather radar. "I think the storm is actually losing strength." Sure enough, that UFO cloud was already melting apart, like gray ice cream left out in the sun. "But let's shoot some pods up anyway. I'm curious to hear what's going on in there. We'll go into the middle of the field. The winds will be better." Dr. Gage led Dex into the middle of the cornfield, where stalks rose up past Dex's knees. He helped Dex load the balls into the rifle. Pulled the trigger 4 times with about 5 seconds in between. Dex aimed at the clouds. Poofed, 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 poofed. Each of the silver balls streaked up into the air and then pop, 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 pop. One by one, the pods burst open, releasing the balloons. They rose up through the sky like 4 brave soldiers ready for a daring mission. "Perfect," Dr. Gage exclaimed. Dex's heart leaped up, and he thought of Jeremy. His brother would love this. Dex could imagine Jeremy's chiming laugh, how his blue eyes would gleam, how they'd talk about this for weeks. And then came the familiar gut stab of worry as Dex wondered where on earth his brother was. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the pictures of exploding bombs and burning tanks. That flashed through his mind, and then boom! For a second, Dex thought a bomb had blasted out of his mind and into the field. But when he opened his eyes, he saw bolts of lightning tearing open the storm clouds. The cloud had turned black and was billowing like smoke. Boom! Dex could actually feel electricity pulsing through the air. The hairs on his arms stood straight up from the shock. Boom! 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 Lightning bolts shot out of the cloud like flaming spears. Here's a picture of Dex shooting it up in the air. Dr. Gage behind him, monitoring. Okay. Kaboom! Dr. Gage grabbed Dex's arm. "I was wrong about this storm. It's dangerous. We need to get away from this lightning." Kaboom! A tree at the edge of the field got hit and exploded into millions of pieces. The skies burst open and rain came pouring down in sheets. In seconds, Dex's hair and clothes were soaked. He ran with Dr. Gage, slipping into the mud, blinking away the raindrops that splashed into his eyes, and then came the hail. The stones were small at first, but soon Dex and Dr. Gage were being pummeled by big rocks. "Cover your head," Dr. Gage boomed. Dex put his hands over his head, but it didn't help. It was like getting hit by baseball pitches at 100 miles an hour. They were just a few feet from the car when a huge hailstone smashed into Dex. He saw a burst of stars, and next thing he knew, he was on the ground. That's where we're stopping today.